Welcome back to the OIS podcast. In this episode, serial entrepreneur Mina Sooch, president and CEO of Ocuphire Pharma, gives insight into growing value in pipeline assets to effectively deliver results for patients. Let's listen to these great tips.
Welcome back, everyone, to the OIS Retina podcast. This is, again, Firas Rahhal of Retina Vitreous Associates Medical Group in Los Angeles and of Excite Ventures in New York City. And I have with me today as my guest, Mina Sooch, who is the current president and CEO of Ocuphire. I believe you're the co-founder also. We'll talk about that shortly. And before we ask you any questions, I want to just give a little background on you, and then I'd like to ask you a little bit about the background as well, if you don't mind, Mina.
Sure.
Thank you. So you were previously co-founder and CEO of Gemfire, which is a public clinical stage company in the cardiovascular space, and that had a successful IPO in 2016. And prior to that, you got a long record here, my dear. CEO, co-founder of, I'll pronounce it Pronai, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That is correct.
Which is also a public clinical stage company in the oncology space. And I do see a lot of overlap between oncology and ophthalmology, as you know. And you were on the board there from its founding in 2004 till 2014. And then I'm very interested in this last piece. You're managing partner and were co-founder of Upjohn Ventures, a VC firm that invests in early stage life science companies, which began in 2003. Does that still exist, and are you still participating in that?
It still exists. We're in harvest mode, and so yes, I'm still managing out the some proceeds coming in from one of our partnerships on one of our portfolio companies.
The list was much longer than that. I honed it down to a few things. You've obviously had an unbelievably productive career in this space and have been very busy and successful. How have all these varied positions kind of led to your current position now with Ocuphire, and what are the similarities or differences between some of those previous posts and your current post?
Sure. So one is, I think at heart, I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I'm a chemical engineer as an undergrad, a Harvard MBA, and have been a strategy consultant, a venture capitalist, and an operating CEO and board member, of course, over the last 25 years in the pharma biotech world. So, but the one thing that's sort of common is starting things, building things, and hopefully creating exits, where we can. So I really like, in particular, those last couple companies that you listed. I think some of the themes are that there are a lot of, I live here in Michigan, by the way, and for 20 years now. My kids have grown up and are in college and about to graduate in one case. But the point is that, being able to find those underappreciated assets, those biotech drugs that have promise, but maybe ran out of steam, whether it's financing steam or talent, to continue to advance it further into the clinic, depending on what stage it was at, is something that I think is a common thread between whether it's Pronai, Gemfire, or Ocuphire. And so all of those ideas all came out of the Midwest, whether it was a company like Pfizer and their work here locally, or whether it was academic or a LASIK surgeon like Dr. Jerry Horn in the case of Nixol, or Dr. Mark Kelly in the case of APX 330. So we really have that similarity that cuts across. But I think the glue is just the ability to sort of want to take something that's underappreciated and add that value and hopefully showcase that and bring it to patients, of course, ultimately in terms of the work that we do at the companies. I would also say maybe the other, you asked kind of what I've learned from those experiences. I think being a VC versus being an operator versus being an advisor consultant really allows me to sit 360 around a table. So I'm really, I hope being able to think about everyone's point of view and really thinking about what we need to do as we build the company at every stage, whether it's gaining capital, whether it's finding the right talent and the network that we built out, really looking for advice. I have to say in every case, we built out KOLs for us. And so every time right away, bring the experts that have had their 30 years in the industry space so that we can leverage that knowledge and history, which you can't replicate. So we were fortunate very early on, for example, at Ocuphire to bring in, Dr. Elliot Lazar and Dr. J.P. Post, Dr. David Boyer, your partner, and others, to really complement our skills and knowledge so that we could advance the programs in the right way. very quickly. So I would say those are some points, but you also asked for differences. So what you learn, right? Every startup, every company that you found and then work through, there's ups and downs. And so I think 3 lessons learned that I would highlight. One is 2 assets are a good thing to have, which is why we went searching for the second asset. And we really wanted to be diversified for ophthalmology and not just 2 front of the eye, although we did look at other front of the eye assets. We looked at over 30 assets in 2019. But having a back in the front really allows us to have conversations with many partners and many investors. So it's really nice to have both, but 2 assets as a portfolio. So you've got more than a binary sort of shot on goal. The second is the later and later the stage, the better. I'm getting older. So the only lesson learned is I have started stuff on a napkin as a VC with an idea and filed the patent with the inventor to now having 11 studies or 10 studies or 5 studies already in place and really starting late phase 2 and then into phase 3 programs, which we are now. So the later the stage, the less the risk, the more closer you are to the market, to the FDA process, regulatory approval process, I think is a nice sort of change that we have here at Ocuphire. And the third, I have to say about the optometry or ocular sector, this is my first. I've done cardiovascular and cancer and other diseases as a VC. This community is one, it's tight knit. You were just saying that earlier, that, everyone knows everyone. So you're one call away from the KOL who can then get you in front of a site or in front of whomever, including the FDA. But the FDA is consistent. Dr. Wiley Chambers has been consistent with everyone over his 30 years, which is really nice, and sort of good number of approvals on the drug side. You don't see that. There's inconsistency. There's a change in where the bar is. And that makes it really hard to be a company drug developer and trying to move things through if the bar is changing. And the other is just all the trials during COVID on top of it. It's just been unbelievable to see the productivity of the community, of the sites, the investigators, the patients, and also fairly capital efficient relative to, again, other disease areas, and trying to build value by adding clinical data as you march towards the NDA. So that's a unique component, is this disease area and working in the front and then now in the back of the eye as well. Just really enjoy the community that I've been a part of for 3 years now.
There's so much in all that, and I agree with everything you said. And I haven't sat at all of those chairs around the table that you mentioned, but in a couple of them as an early stage VC and as a retina ophthalmologist myself who's involved in a lot of trials. So I've been in a couple of those chairs. I couldn't agree more. Your broad experience and diverse experience really does give you the perspective of, I think, everyone, if not almost everyone at that table. That's a distinct advantage in your current spot as a CEO. Do you find that to be part of the challenge, is getting everyone on the same page when you're trying to put the pieces together in the early stages?
I think that's a great question. I would say that at Ocuphire, we've been very fortunate to have our board, our corporate board, as we built it and added. I think our latest addition was Susan Benton, which many of you know in the industry, when we went public in November. Great add to give us that commercial kind of late stage development, longevity perspective in the ocular space. To be honest, and then since I get to build every team, we sort of bring in folks that make sense, that are focused on our goals. And at Ocuphire, since we started, we had Nixol. We said we want to get in the clinic. When we got APX in, we want to get it into the clinic. I mean, not next day, but over the course of figuring out the right indication, the right protocol, make drug, get everything set up, broaden the patent estates in every case before we start something, and then execute. And I think as long as right now we have 4 trials that were the focus since we've been public in November, and that is the focus. So what's nice is we can use that to sort of create a commonality around everyone's past histories and what they need to contribute to the company. So again, 4 trials, deliver on those 4 trials, and hopefully the data comes with that execution success as well. So.
Thank you. You also mentioned something that caught my ear as a commonality of some of those posts, which is, I'm a starter. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, and you clearly are. And early stage biotech, I know the ophthalmology space and not the others, but there's obviously similarities. I sometimes think those of us who are in it, and the VC I'm associated with is an early stage, it's somewhat masochistic. And one time Emmett Cunningham said to me at a meeting, and he's helped me a lot in this space, said, oh, you guys at Excite, this is high risk area where you live. And and then now you're seeing some of the later stage stuff as you brought companies to IPO and late stage clinical trials and commercialization. It's all fun, but the early part is really challenging. Which part do you like the most? What do you see if you're going more? You said something about age, which I got the gist of that.
I get to color mine, so we're all good.
Is that more fun for you now because you feel like the timelines are better, or what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, again, as an early stage VC, and we started, preclinical stage at 3 out of, I think, 9 companies or 4 were all preclinical. I think it's harder now for me to look at just animal data and say, I believe in the mechanism and the data. Whereas having human safety and then some human efficacy data and mechanistic data really goes a long way to reducing the risk. So I would say that my comfort and joy in doing clinical work and having all 3 of these last companies be at the clinical stage it's very rewarding because we're actually seeing the impact. We're publishing on it. We're getting discussions with the FDA. We're having end of phase 2 meetings, and we're working towards an NDA, which is really fun, actually, right? To think now for one of our indications, we'll talk about that we're going to march down a path towards an NDA. And that's what we do drug development for, is to bring drugs to patients. So I'm going to say that my early stage years are gone and I like the late stage. You can come over to the dark side later for us.
And at the end of all that, it's also now for you less masochistic. So congratulations.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's probably the main thing. But
let's talk a little bit, a lot about Ocuphire. That's what we're here to talk about also, yep. Of course. And the first indication I want to talk about, even though this is OIS retina, I want to hear about the first indication. Is it pronounced Nixol?
Yes.
Nixol, an ophthalmic drop. It seems to me that this is based in phentolamine, a drug that's well known to ophthalmology, 0.75%, and it constricts the pupil. And there's a number of different programs that you have. I want to hear your thoughts on the different programs, but in particular in this area for the retina community, we're kind of interested and fascinated by the idea that we might again have reversal drops for the thousands of patients we make suffer with dilation every year. So yep. Tell us about Nixol, what the programs are, and then maybe more elaborately or detailed about the mydriatic reversal part of it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So first, phentolamine mesylate, yep, an existing drug approved over 60 years ago for reversing, lowering blood pressure in a surgical setting, and then about 10 years ago to reverse anesthesia. Those were both injectable formats, and we are the first ever proprietary drop formulation, which is also preservative-free, no EDTA, and stable. And I say all those things because those are good underlying characteristics for a commercial product. And we've also got over 8 clinical studies done now on it, of which one of them is our latest phase 3 in reversal of mydriasis, which we'll talk about in a second, which was a phase 3 registration trial that we just read out on March 15th. But the other 2 programs, real quick, before I come back to RM, is we have a phase 2 in presbyopia, which we initiated in mid-February. And we know 2021 is the year of presbyopia, I think, is probably the best way to characterize the anterior segment focus in that area. And so we're proud to have sort of built it into our plan 2 years ago and really be in the middle of, Allergan filing their NDA in that space, and others finishing or starting phase 3s, and us starting a phase 2 that we've guided that we'd read out at the end of this quarter, the second quarter. And we just started it in mid-February. So it's really nice to see the availability and productivity of the patients and the sites. What I want to say about presbyopia and what's unique about Nixol, the one minute point I would make to the audience is, unlike the other approaches that, yes, use either pilocarpine or a cholinergic agonist that works on the sphincter muscle to constrict it pretty severely to get to below 2 millimeters, which is what you need with the pinhole, we actually use Nixol to get you 1 millimeter because it's works on the iris dilator muscle and reduces it moderately. And then we use low dose pilo at 0.4% to get the other 1 millimeter or more that we need. So you're sort of getting 2 moderate miotic mechanisms using both muscles to then achieve the pinhole. And I think that's what makes us unique. So we think the safety, tolerability, durability, distance, vision being maintained all have no headache, no brow ache, things like that will be very positive, we hope, to continue to showcase in our phase 2 study. So that's the point of differentiation, but there is room for many presbyopic options as a drop, since it's the first time the community will have such an option. And I think 100 million subjects out there just in the US. So I think it is the star of the year, I think, and we look forward to more data readouts in the field, including ours, and just being a part of that field and then continue to progress the program into phase 3 if we have successful phase 2 data this quarter.
Just for clarity, for the presbyopia indication, it's going to be the Nixol plus pilocarpine in some percentage and some dosing frequency.
Yeah, 0.4% is the dose that we selected, actually. That's on clinicaltrials.gov. And it'll be a kit sort of commercial option, which we tested the concept in our end of phase 2 meeting. And we do need to show that the components contribute to the total package. And I just showed you why Nixol alone, again, iris dilator, has a certain sort of, we think, elasticity. So we think that moderate miotic is sort of the extent to which you can use that to reduce the pupil size, which is nice because you never overshoot. And you do not create too small of a pupil, which is a really important safety issue to consider with miotic drugs. And with the low dose pilo, that 0.4% we think is just that right dose, below where you're going to see the side effects, but just enough to get not 2.5, 3 millimeters of reduction, but that 1 millimeter of reduction. And alone, each cannot get you 3 lines of improvement, because each alone do not contribute to the pinhole. You can't get to the pinhole with just one. You need 1 + 1 = the pinhole. And that's how we can get the 3 lines of improvement on the primary endpoint and show the contributions of the components in our phase 3. So, so for right now, our phase 2 is the 2 together compared to placebo, and we're studying the components as secondary endpoints.
How will the patient use this? Will they use it on a regular basis, as needed basis, planning to be doing a lot of reading in a few hours? I'm going to put my medicine in. How will it be used?
Yeah, I think the industry probably hasn't figured that out yet for us. So I don't know that I can have the answer, but I would say the following, that for Nixol, at least, what I didn't mention about the product profile earlier, besides it's got a very nice safety profile in these 8 trials that are completed, and it's partly due to the active phentolamine. It's just a really nice alpha-1 antagonist, alpha-1, alpha-2 antagonist, is that it's durable. So unlike other eye drops, there are some that are also 24-hour durability, but not any of the cholinergic agonists. So we have the uniqueness, again, to bring one component that will maintain 1 line of vision improvement near 24 hours, maybe even 1 line of distance as well for 24 hours. So you take it at night, every night before you go to bed, which is going to be similar to the night vision disturbance indication. And then in the morning, or whenever you want to start reading, about 30 minutes before, take a drop of the low dose pilo. And if you need another one, if it wears off at 4, 6, 8 hours, we don't know till we run the study, then you take a second drop. And I think that's how all the drops will work. There's not a single drop out there that's claiming more than 8 hours for us. So if you want more than 6 or 8 hours, you're going to need to take a second drop. But here are my reading glasses, and I don't mind getting up once or twice during the day to use a drop instead of having my glasses on all day. So so I think that's how some will think, and others will just use it PRN. If you just decide every once in a while you want to, you can take our 2 drugs at 5 minutes apart. That's not a problem either. It's just, again, we think there's a goodness to a routine. And just having that slightly smaller pupil actually enhances your everyday vision. So we think that's a good thing, and patients might actually like taking Nixol. But that's for presbyopia, which then has parallels to, I got sidetracked. So RM, presbyopia, night vision disturbance. So we're the only ones working in the clinic, whereas presbyopia, there are multiple players, which we think it validates the sector. For night vision, we are kind of pioneering it, and the prior sponsor that we brought the asset in from was doing the same. So we're running a phase 3 at over 15 sites here in the United States. It's actively recruiting, and we're looking to take care of patients that have sort of moderate to severe night vision disturbance, the halos, the glare, the starbursts, either caused surgically by the LASIK surgeons or maybe by IOL implants, or aging, dry eye as well. That's imperfections on the edges. And if you can get that pupil, again, moderately from 7 down to 6 or 6 down to 5, which is where the higher order aberrations are, then you can dial out in your frame that the light scatter that's coming in and really improve that night vision. In some of our market research, we learned that 25% of people avoid driving in over 100 patients that we surveyed with night vision disturbance. So it is a real quality of life concern. In our discussions with the FDA, we agreed on the endpoint. We're running our phase 3 with that endpoint. And we have some proof of concept data from our phase 2. And we're excited again to see how that reads out, which will be around the third quarter of this calendar year. So that's our other program, and I'm going to come back to RM. So, which is
to the retina guys.
Yeah, and so where we were focused right now on RM to go after the routine eye exams, just in terms of the study design is healthy subjects. And we just completed 185 subjects phase 3 registration trial. It was 1 day in length, and we tried 3 mydriatic agents. We had phenylephrine, tropicamide, and a combo pyramid. So we, again, we had light eyes and dark eyes, and we had 2 drops in the study eye, right eye, and we had 1 drop in the non-study eye. And our results were very positive and exceeded our expectations. To summarize, we found that we more rapidly reversed, the primary endpoint was to return percent of responders back to their normal baseline pupil diameter within 0.2 millimeters. And we had about 50% compared to 7% at 90 minutes, which was the kind of agreed upon endpoint with the FDA. But it turns out we also hit it at 60 minutes. And then we hit that separation and statistics p-values less than 0.0001 across the entire time elements up to 6 hours. We had that same effects in light eyes and dark eyes, although light eyes responded faster as expected. And we had the effects across 3 agents. Again, phenylephrine responded faster, but we had nice effects in separation between tropicamide and pyramid. So this is, and then 2 drops and 1 drop didn't have as much difference as we thought. But where it did have a difference, if you're darker eyes or using tropicamide or have a tropicamide in the combo, you may want to use 2 drops because it'll really help the reversal a bit more than the 1 drop. But we had activity with and statistics with both. So we were really happy with the results, and it sets the stage to do a second phase 3. Do a PED study, because it's actually the active ingredient, phentolamine, has been approved for 3 years and up in the dental anesthesia application that I may have forgotten to mention earlier, and also just get our manufacturing program ready for submission in terms of making commercial batches with 1 year stability. So it's a pretty clear path. And so the work that we're doing for, we'll call it the routine eye exams in the optometrist office or the ophthalmologist office, can come to the retina. So I didn't forget that this group wants to talk about post-surgical, mydriasis recovery. And we definitely and believe 100% that it should be used in the specialty settings as well. And we would love to be able to offer something like RevEyes, but a much better version of it that was available long ago to patients today in a very simple single-use, vial that the physicians can give as soon as the surgery and the procedure is over. So there's no reason it's only for routine. It's definitely for both. Just our study design is around healthy subjects going in for a dilation.
I'm glad you mentioned the name, because I was struggling to remember the name of the RevEyes and
Yep.
to ask you about it. I had the impression, and for no other reason than intuition, so please correct me if I'm wrong, I've had the impression that that went away based on a business model rather than maybe efficacy or need and people's desire to have this, because as we mentioned earlier, the patients ask for it all the time after our retina exams. Of course, they're all dilated, so they go home and they're frustrated, and driving home is difficult, etc. And then it just sort of disappeared. Although there's one practitioner in town here in LA that my patients always say, hey, can't you give me the reversal like, the referring doctor? And there isn't any. But I guess they're using Pilo in some institutions maybe as a replacement. We don't do that. What happened to the previous, and what was the problem with the business model, if any? And if that is the right reason, if I'm guessing, what are you going to do differently, if anything?
Yeah, we get that a lot, obviously, because RevEyes or dipiprazole was also an alpha-1 antagonist in terms of the class. So it's in the same class, which is actually what gave us the idea to go after it 2 years ago, in addition to night vision and presbyopia, that there was a precedent already laid forward. And it was not taken off the market for efficacy reasons, or technically not safety. However, from the FDA's benefit risk analysis. But I think from a patient perspective and physician perspective, the safety profile was not very attractive. There were beet red eyes, you needed 4 drops. There was burning and stinging associated as well, and ptosis, and a few other side effects. So it was a fairly long list in order to save those hours over the course of 3, 6, or 8 hours of faster dilation return. So in our minds, what we're offering is a very tolerable. We have no burning or stinging in our data to date. Very mild redness, that when we do get redness, and no ptosis, no other brow ache, headache, because again, we're working just on the iris dilator muscle. We're using either 1 drop or 2 drop, not 4 drops. And so that whole safety tolerability side, we think is improved. Having said that, for us, you're not the first doctor to tell us people come in and ask for it. So we think that's positive. So even with those side effects, people were still wanting a reversal drop. That's the message I think we want the community to kind of hear. And so on the business model side, what was wrong back then is it was the 90s for the most part. And they were only charging the doctor to have a multi-use bottle, and it would only last for 3 weeks. That's what the label said. So, and you had to mix it, as the doctor. And I don't know any drug you use today that you mix at the chair or at the bedside outside of an ICU setting or in the hospital setting. So it's not a practical model. It's not something that the doctors and offices want to handle. So we're going to have preservative-free blow-fill seal, single-use vials, use it on the patient, throw it away. And, our business model is either the doctors can just buy it from us at a reasonable, price per unit, or we actually think, we did market research on this, that patients are going to be willing to pay $5 to $20. And that's the price range that we surveyed, and there really wasn't any sensitivity in that range. So you pick the number, and we'll do more homework now that we're thinking commercial, pre-commercial. So, we think that the business model now is private cash pay, maybe $10. I'll just take the middle number for a moment. And the doctors can either charge the patient or they can absorb it. It is up to the doctors because they may get more patients in the routine setting to dilate their eyes, to be honest, because there are many patients, your patients can't say no for us, but the routine eye exam patient can. And we found some market research to suggest we might be able to increase that by 30%. So again, we're here to help everyone who's dilating the eyes, the physicians and the patients, get back to their normal faster and not dread getting dilated, right? That's the other part of it. So I think the business model is different in a couple meaningful ways, but the commercial product is also different in various ways. We think our efficacy is probably similar with less drops. We've looked at some comparative data. So, we feel the benefit risk looks promising, and we'll do the second registration trial. And this will be available, hopefully for a label to reverse it using phenylephrine or tropicamide or a combo thereof, to reverse pharmacologically induced mydriasis. So that's what we're going for.
I think there's no question, to put a cap, that the demand is there. We hear it all the time in our clinics. And I think the business model works. I think the majority of patients who ask for it now, which seem to be a lot, would likely be the ones to feel that $10 or some, small fee is well worth it, because they're shortening their time out of work and their time out of being able to be functional. It sounds like a winner. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and you mentioned Pilo just before we get to the retina, which of course we need to get to, although this is obviously applicable to the retinal. And Dr. Elliott Lasso will be really happy that you brought up post-mydriatic recovery, because we've been talking about that as a nice place to start to really begin to emphasize this product profile. Pilo has issues. So I'm a little concerned with docs who might be using Pilo off-label, because working on the sphincter muscle to constrict it back in order to get back to your normal pupil size has a lot of side effects that are well known, whether on the extreme retinal tear, in the middle, other issues related to using the ciliary muscle as well, which is, gets affected whenever you use Pilo. You affect the sphincter muscle and the ciliary muscle. And there's just a whole series of well-documented side effects in using pilocarpine as a reversal agent. It's been studied in the 90s, but there's really been very few papers in the last 2 decades that focus on Pilo to reverse mydriasis. And I think the consensus for most was it's not the safest muscle to use to reverse the dilation, and the iris dilator muscle is a sort of a good muscle to use. And so we're excited again that we're the only ones with an alpha-1 blocker in clinic, in development, patent coverage. So we look forward to hopefully being a single solution if we continue down the path towards the NDA. So
I agree 100% for whatever it's worth. I don't think pilocarpine use for reversal mydriasis makes any sense. And we have it in our office, and we don't do that. And I think it's pretty few and far in between, but I have heard of it, and I'm glad you brought it up and we talked about it, because that doesn't make sense. Way too large a side effect profile for such an indication.
Right. I think it also might cause narrow angle closure. There's many, I sort of only listed one or two, but there's a series of side effects. Yep. Okay, so let's move to the retina.
Let us move to diabetic. I know my retina viewers are going to fascinated by the diabetic retinopathy. I am actually. Whenever you start talking about oral medication, there's a newness to that. It's been talked about many times before. There's obviously pros and cons to everything, but let's start with the beginning. The product is called APX3330. And if I'm not mistaken, it is an oral tablet, and it would be treating diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema, which are somewhat separate entities, but you get the idea. Tell us the mechanism of this drug. And I read that it's a dual action compound. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the compound itself.
Yeah, so it is a small molecule first of all, and it therefore is very easy, obviously, to make oral. And it hits a novel target called REF1 that Dr. Mark Kelly discovered over 2 decades ago, which is a redox oxidation factor. And essentially, it's a transcription factor regulator, and it regulates 2 downstream and important into the 2 different pathways, both HIF1 alpha down the VEGF pathway, and NF-kappa B down the TNF alpha and the IL-6 and the other other cytokine inflammatory markers. And what it does is it basically doesn't allow those transcription factors to then activate and create their downstream products. So it inhibits REF1, which is otherwise an activator of those 2 downstream pathways. And so we basically have an anti-VEGF mechanism and an anti-inflammatory mechanism to bring it back to how the retinal community sees the 2 options of steroids that are injected, or obviously Eylea, Lucentis, Avastin, and other anti-VEGFs in development that are used on the anti-VEGF pathway. So we're upstream, and we add inflammation in a safe way, as opposed to potentially having to use steroids that then cause some of the IOP and glaucoma and other issues for patients. So we're really excited to have oral as our novel or innovation, and the dual pathways.
If you can talk about it, and I assume you can, because the small molecule, is there a history on this? What is the history of this compound, if you're able to share with us? I know there was some previous safety data from perhaps another indication. Can you share any of that previous history with us of this drug?
Yeah, I mean, as a public company, there's a lot more data in our SEC filings as well, and our website, a lot of publications. The history is that APX3330 was originally E3330, being developed with over 10 trials and a lot of preclinical work as well by Eisai in Japan. So large pharma in Japan was interested in the anti-inflammatory properties and indications. So they're going after hepatitis A, B, C, and alcoholic steatosis. So various phase 1 and phase 2, again, collectively 10 trials. They actually saw some signals of efficacy positively on the liver and inflammation, but they ended up licensing in Humira and another agent over a course of a few years. And so about 15 years ago or so, they basically put it on the shelf. And Dr. Mark Kelly at that time was working on his target and realized that that small molecule would interact with the target and was beautifully interacting with the target, not specifically TNF alpha, which was the hypothesis of the Eisai team. So it took a couple years, but they were able to bring the asset into a spin out of Indiana. And then they worked in cancer. So you've got a history in the inflammation hepatic space of patients, almost 320 patients there treated with the drug. And then there were just under 20 patients in the oncology study, solid tumor kind of folks, unfortunately, on their last leg, that were given APX3330 to see what it would do to help both on target engagement, PK, PD, as well as obviously any efficacy. And it turned out that there were several patients that went up to 600 mg per day dose, oral tablet, and had out to 1 year and had a very nice safety profile. There was actually 3. 1 or 2 that were past a year and 1 just close to a year, and a few others that were many, many months. And at Eisai, there was also a whole handful that were 2 to 3 months. So we have a very large body of safety human data showcasing that this mechanism, given systemically as an oral tablet, had very little organ toxicities or other side effects, except 2 things we saw, which was slight, less than 10%. We actually think it's less than 5%, mild diarrhea and mild rash. So we think for an oral chronic option for the retinal space, that this is the best profile I think that's seen to date. And again, our diligence in an oral option before we brought it in with our KOLs was safety, 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 and then safety, safety, safety again, because we know that that's been the issue for those that have come before that have been oral. And in general, what's important to all of you, because treating locally versus treating systemically is sort of a paradigm change. So we're looking forward to offering for DR, the study design is in end PDR and some early PDR patients, 43 to 61 on the DRSS score, and evaluating a two-step improvement as our primary endpoint in diabetic retinopathy specifically. And where we're gleaning the DME data is we're allowing in the non-study eye for them to have centrally involved DME. And so because of systemic, we'll be able to see what some of the other fluid and or vision improvements might be as well in both eyes, but specifically in DME patients. So I think for us, our focus is definitely DR as the first, but while we're at it, we're going to get some additional information for DME that can then set us up to do a second study in DME specifically and or wet AMD, which we'll talk about. But I think the key is diabetic retinopathy is an unmet need. And we think we have an oral option that at its core has a unique mechanism and has just the significant amount of safety data, as well as its mechanism also imparts good reason to believe you shouldn't expect to see too many untoward side effects with it.
This is amazing because what you said about the indication and your plan to study, and I think this is becoming now more and more normative. I, for a long time, have felt that we should be more formally studying the effect on the overall diabetic retinopathy of some of these great drugs that we're now getting that were originally intended for DME, and we're finding out they're amazing for proliferative disease and for reversal of advanced non-proliferative disease. The panorama data from EYLEA is very impressive. It's actually really robust and compelling data. And I'm glad that others now, yourself included, are interested in studying formally the effect on diabetic retinopathy, not just the DME, because ultimately that's the more widespread part of this problem.
There's 10 times more of them, but obviously the severity of the disease is more in DME patients, of course, so you want to treat them first, obviously.
100%.
So.
And I applaud you for studying it this way. I think that's the right approach, and I think I'm looking forward to hearing how you do. At this dose of 600 milligrams that you mentioned, how much do you know about the penetration of the drug into the eye or into the spaces in the eye that we need them to get to at that level?
Yeah, so we actually have PK data from both ASI and Apexion, phase 1 PK data, and both very similar curves. And what we found is in a LCNB model that had very similar 50% fluid reduction, as EYLEA and others have in that model, that dose, when carried forward and looked at it on a concentration between our human concentration and the animal concentration to reach efficacy, there was a 50 to 100-fold larger amount of drug we're giving at 600 mg. And that's the dose that we can give safely. So we're actually going after our phase 2 Zeta-1 trial, which just this morning we announced screening of our first patient at many sites, including yours. So call out to any docs out there. Feel free to come find us for the diabetic retinopathy patients. We are basically giving the most drug we can safely to see if we can maximize the effect in this phase 2 trial, which is a double mass randomized placebo-controlled study. It is not an open label study because we already have 10, 11 trials behind us. And we feel pretty confident of our ability to see an effect and therefore didn't want to do an open label study. And so we wanted to do it right. We wanted to get the data point so we can move into phase 3 on DR and then expand into DME or wet AMD or GA, where we would complement anti-VEGF treatments and not, of course, go at it alone. But this is a single agent study, and we're pretty excited that we have more drug probably than we need, and therefore have a good chance of seeing an effect. Having said that, we could dose de-escalate if there are any safety signals of concern if we see in this phase 2 that maybe we hadn't seen previously. But the other is we're actually at ARVO next month, or is it April? We will be presenting some PK/PD data on the modeling in the retina for us. So stay tuned, and we have exact numbers of what we think the predicted amount of our drug is, and Dr. Mark Kelly and his staff will be presenting that data. So
perfectly fair answer, and I will look for that. That's going to be of some interest, and good for you. You're going to publish that. Let's talk briefly in our final couple of minutes here on the wet AMD prospect that you mentioned. I'd read that that would be the next logical step. Certainly everyone in these spaces recognizes the similarity of the diseases, VEGF, et cetera. That then, the APX2009, is that just an intravitreal version of this drug that we were just talking about, or is this a completely different drug?
Yeah, no, it's a completely different drug. So Dr. Mark Kelly has a whole series of chemical compounds that he designed around APX3030 to kind of capture the space. So we actually have composition of matter on 2009, 2014, and others. Of the group, 2009 has multiple publications in ophthalmic models, as well as in vitro mechanistic papers as well. Again, you can find some of those on our website. So we were thinking that what we found from conversations with the doctors, and again, I want to shout out to 4 of our KOLs for the back of the eye. So Dr. Boyer, Dr. Allingham, Dr. Kaiser, and Dr. Heyer were invaluable in that design that you were crediting us on. So you need to thank them for helping us all summer. Yeah, all summer and early until we submitted the protocol in the fourth quarter. And it turns out that the target is really exciting and important and interesting to many folks. And so, but systemic delivery versus local delivery was sort of the input and feedback that we kept getting. So we said, well, our second generation product should be a local delivered version of the molecule. And whether that's intravitreal or maybe some other proven local delivery is where we have 2009, APX2009 sort of earmarked, because 330 has so much human data that it didn't make any sense to take a step back and not offer the market and patients an oral option, and not to be scared because others had failed before. When you look back and we've analyzed those failures, which is just a handful, not that many, most of them were because liver toxicities, cardiovascular, blood pressure toxicities at doses, or they never could achieve the dose they wanted for the translation from animal models. And when you put all those together, we don't have any of those issues that we're observing or seeing. And oral isn't novel. There are 2 nutraceuticals that have been used for, decades, sold by your 2 largest players in the eye space for general eye health. And they're oral tablets that you take for general eye health. So the idea that something that you take orally can get to the retina at pretty similar concentrations to what's in the blood is sort of out there and established for decades. And it was really finding a retinal product that you could have a mechanism that could be safely given. But coming back to 009, we're about a year away from an IND. And we would love to work on that with a partner who's as excited in having a local delivered REF1 inhibition molecule, or with future funding, in another calendar year, we could also see ourselves developing it ourselves. So I think we're excited to provide a local and a systemic opportunity around the REF1 target. So that's our thinking around 2009, and that therefore wet AMD made a lot of sense to think about it. You're already taking an injection, so you would just be adding, another injection in that case. So. Was
the age of the patients with wet AMD a factor in the decision to stay in the intravitreal space for that one, or not really?
No, I don't. I'm going to just say we haven't gotten that far into the thinking on, tablets versus intravitreal or other delivery mechanisms. So I think that is an area of work for the company. Again, we were sort of focused on these 4 trials and getting them launched. Sure. But I have to say that many folks on the team are excited to continue to explore how do we develop 2009 in a local way. And I think, again, leaning on partners and delivery formats that have been proven is our thinking, because we don't want to reinvent. We want to borrow and use what the industry is de-risking for that molecule. But, we're excited to pursue that as well. It just won't be right this moment. But again, timing wise, when we do start working on it, we'd be about a year away from an IND. So one final question about that. When would you project, if you can, clinical trials in the wet AMD space with the product we were just speaking of? So 2009 or APX3030? 2009. Yeah, so there's actually 2 things. For 2009, I think, so probably 2023, because we're already starting in 2021 and sort of thinking about when you'd launch a trial. So I think that would be reasonable to expect, and it'd probably be a phase 1-2 right out of the gate. But I was going to say for APX33.0 on the systemic side, not the local side, our thinking is with positive DR data that we would want to expand as an adjunct therapy and do a DME study, a wet AMD study, kind of similar to Kodiak and others that sort of, start to, go after in parallel the different indications. And in that case, we would want to have the anti-VEGF and, either the initiations and then start APX33.0 once you achieve, the primer sequence, I guess we'll call it, that you do to get the patient to your target goal. And then see if we could extend treatment, if we can increase response rates with adding APX33.0, which in my mind, the best benefit is you're going to seesaw less because you're going to have constant exposure to the back of the retina to reduce the inflammation, reduce the vessel formation, the fluid leakage. And, that's what we're hopeful for. So I think we actually could envision APX33.0 starting a wet AMD study before a local delivery APX2009 if things went well for us. So.
Makes sense. I'm very excited by this. I look forward to seeing data as it comes out as well. And I can tell you the patients will be excited by the idea of taking a pill rather than taking a shot. So that, more to come on that. But thank you. And I do think you're kind of going to where the patients, I think, would like us to go.
It might be the first time the patients will leave the retinal doc, so into a new era. But I think at the bottom end of all of this is, we've got two exciting products, front and the back. Lots of data readouts coming, presbyopia in the second quarter, night vision in the third quarter, sometime early next year, hopefully if recruitment for the DR study goes as planned, have that readout as well. And then every time we have a positive data readout, then we'll start planning for the next evolution towards an NDA. So, we're excited. Hopefully we're bringing some new treatment options where there aren't any today. So I think that was part of our goal in building Ocuphire. And that was the other common theme of all of my companies was big problems, want to try to solve them and maybe go after a little bit differently than everyone else, but with de-risking kind of all along the way, not taking sort of big binary risks, but trying to look for areas where we've shown certain risks are off the table so we can focus on, those risks that we can't control and can only, figure out with clinical trial design and execution. So.
Thank you, Mina. Thank you very much. Mina Sooch, President, CEO of Ocuphire, just for everyone, again, if they caught in towards the end. Thanks a lot for taking the time. Fascinating discussion, really cool concepts, and good luck in your continued clinical trials.
Thank you, Firas. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
We hope you enjoyed these valuable insights from Mina Sooch and can use them in your own career. For more valuable information, register for the upcoming OIS Myopia Innovation Showcase, taking place on April 29th. And be sure to join us back here next week for a discussion with Bala Ambadi, who was the youngest person to ever become a medical doctor. He's also the CEO of Ivina Delivery Systems.